Well, as the World Meteorological Organization reported, 2010 is the warmest year on record. But the heat doesn't seem to have fired up the negotiations at the Cancun Climate Summit, at least not yet. Haven't heard about the summit? Well, it's not your fault. But whether media are there or not, it is the follow-up to Copenhagen, and it's happening. And the future of the world's only binding greenhouse gas reduction protocol, Kyoto, hangs in the balance. The Nation magazine's Tina Gerhardt, contributor also to Alternate, gives us an eyewitness account next. But first, in case you didn't get the picture, take a look.
Of the opinion that by bringing attention to the fact that there's so much talking going on and very little action, we want to let people know that it's time for action. And we brought together representatives of students from around the world, and we staged an event with their heads in the sand, which is what these governments are doing. They're not really making much progress here.
Heads out of the sand. Tina Gerhardt's been covering what's going on in Cancun. She's joining us by Skype. Welcome to the program, Tina. Glad to have you. Talk a little bit about who's there in Cancun, because certainly here in the United States, we're not getting much of a sense of it.
Thanks for having me, Laura. Well, all of the 194 member groups are here. That's 192 nations plus 2 negotiating groups. There's not a lot of heads of state coming this week. We have 20 to 25 heads of state coming. Interestingly, none of the G20 countries are sending heads of state. However, some of the countries in the most dire circumstances are managing to send their heads of state. Colombia, which is in a state of emergency due to floods, is sending a head of state, and other countries that are in similar situations.
Talk a bit about what you're hearing from people about the state of emergency that they're facing, because a lot of us for many, many years have gotten used to the sense that this is something many, many years hence, this concern, this worry about climate change and global warming.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that it really marks. I was in Bonn in the interstitial UNFCCC negotiating meetings since Copenhagen, so between Copenhagen and Cancun. And there, it's really incredible to see how much weight, unlike in most of the mainstream media, the least developed countries, the Alliance of Small Island States, the G7 countries get in terms of the amount of time that they get to talk in the meetings versus how much time they get in the media. Now, having said that, what I noticed in terms of what they were saying at this meeting that's completely new is that most of the countries were starting their remarks expressing that climate change is affecting them at home right now. So, for example, Colombia is, as I mentioned, a state of emergency because of these floods it's been experiencing. It has somewhere around 130 dead, 70,000 displaced. Venezuela is also experiencing floods. They have 34 dead and about 7,000 displaced. Philippines jumped in and said, look, I'm really sorry to hear this. We're in solidarity with everyone who is suffering right now. And we ourselves have experienced 10 tropical storms this month alone. So when you have everyone introducing their remarks on the draft text by saying, and here's the situation at home, and listing up these incredible climatic changes, it's pretty dire. And I couldn't, because of the issues of water coming up repeatedly in terms of floods, with Pakistan too, a little bit more in the background time-wise, I couldn't help but think about the introduction to Bill McKibben's Earth, because he talks about the fact that it's not only increased rainfall, it's also this torrential downpour that we're going to be seeing more and more of.
We're going to talk to Bill McKibben next. With respect to what is obstructing change, is it simply a powerful nations versus less powerful nations divide?
There is a divide between the different nation groups. So often we've seen in the past year, since Copenhagen, this division between China and the U.S. That's how the media often frames the debate. What I'm really pleased to see is that the cards have been laid down for everyone to see at this COP16, which is that it's really actually a debate between the Copenhagen Accord and the Kyoto Protocol. The U.S. is the only nation, the only developed nation not to have signed on to the Kyoto Protocol. And what the Kyoto Protocol stipulates is that it was drafted in 1997, went into effect in 2005, and it really said that developed nations have to make greenhouse gas reductions and commitments to them. Now, the only nation that didn't sign on, as I mentioned, is the U.S. The Copenhagen Accord is different in that it puts the onus on developing nations like China and India to state emissions reductions. That's in terms of content. There's a difference between Copenhagen and Kyoto. There's also a difference in form. The Kyoto Protocol was negotiated and ratified in adherence with the UNFCCC guiding principles. There are two of them. That things be negotiated transparently and that they're negotiated inclusively. The Copenhagen Accord obviously was a backroom deal, and it didn't reflect those principles. It was drafted by the basic nations plus the U.S.
What about enforcement protocols with Copenhagen? And is there a danger that there'll be another backroom deal coming out of Cancun?
We've had numerous rumors floating around last week that there might be a backroom deal. Christiana Figueres, the United Nations Secretary General, who took over from Eva de Boer earlier this year, she assured in a press conference on Friday afternoon that there was no backroom deal at all, that everything was on the table, that the draft texts that are sitting in front of the lead climate negotiators to discuss, they've just come in to discuss tomorrow and Wednesday are the only texts that exist. So ostensibly, there's no backroom text.
And what about enforcement if they just end up going with the Copenhagen plan?
Well, that's one of the tricky points about the Copenhagen Accord. There is no real mechanism for monitoring, reporting, or verifying. That's sort of the enforcement arm of what they're here to negotiate. They're here to negotiate three things: greenhouse gas reductions and commitments on them from developed nations. Second, funding from developed nations to developing nations to help developing nations adapt to climate change. And third, they're here to negotiate this enforcement, as you just mentioned. And the Copenhagen Accord, since it wasn't agreed to and ratified by this UN process, meaning it's transparent and inclusive, it really isn't going to be able to be ratified. That's why it's just taken note of. And then you can't really enforce whatever commitments people make. They're voluntary.
Right. Tina Gerhardt, writing for The Nation magazine and Alternet. We'll put links to her pieces at our site. Thank you so much for being with us from Cancun. You're watching GRITtv. Thanks.